a ransom for many.
Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
When the days for Jesus to be taken up were fulfilled, he resolutely determined a journey to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of him. On the way they entered a Samaritan village to prepare for his reception there, but they would not welcome him, because the destination of his journey was Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they asked, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to consume them?" Jesus turned and rebuked them, and they journeyed to another village. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
One of the things that we need to do like Jesus is to be resolute in our journey ultimately to the heavenly Jerusalem. That is, resolute to become the saint God wants us to be, has called us to be from all eternity, and will help us be if we ask for the graces and do the will of the Father in heaven. And I think that's what characterized St. Therese, the little flower, who had to leave behind her hypersensitivity and her other little, you could say, even a little bit of frivolous ways and thin-skinnedness, to become the saint that we all know her to be. It wasn't something that happened right away, though certainly at her young age, she did it relatively quickly by our standards. St. Therese's father, those of you who know a little bit about her biography, was a watchmaker, and watchmakers have to pay attention to detail. And that's something that, if you've read her biography or autobiography, you know that she did. That she paid attention to detail. And I think we should too, because most of the battles we face, nobody notices. They're interior battles, and it's only really God and ourselves that know that we're struggling. For an example, there was a nun, a bigger nun in her community, and they were all washing clothes together, and she would splash water on St. Therese. And St. Therese, asked her, would you please not do that? And she smiled and said, sure, whatever. But then she went back and it kept happening. I'm not saying she did it on purpose, but the water kept splashing on Therese. And I think it's good for us to think of the things and the person that annoy us the most, that just bother us, that annoy us, and we can feel the interior tension of not coming across as unpleasant when we want to. We want to just let it out. A scream, a yell, an aggravation, a cutting comment. And it's those interior little martyrdoms that characterize St. Therese, who would literally or almost, sweat at holding in what she felt like saying, but did it out of charity to her sister. And being cloistered, that's who she was kind of stuck with. She wasn't dealing, and that's even harder. Because you get to know people very well and also deal with their faults very frequently. So St. Therese reminds us that our vocation and our mother, the church, is love. And her little way is attainable to all of us. It's really the way of Jesus in the gospel. And spiritual childhood, of course, is not to be confused with childishness. Spiritual childhood can also accompany the greatest martyrs. It's trusting abandonment to God, who will give us all the graces we need for our personal sanctity, our personal sanctification. Maybe sometimes we doubt or don't think God will really show up for this particular trial that we're going through, whatever it is. It might be a legal thing, something with the government. It might be just with a person in our life. But God will give us all the graces we need
Some graces are harder to obtain than others. You have to beg for them. They don't all come equally easy because they're bigger graces, or they have other people involved. So when St. Therese undertook the spiritual motherhood of the murderous criminal Pranzini, she undertook real sacrifices to save his soul as he was on death row. That was not an easy grace to obtain. But he asked for a crucifix, and I believe he kissed it at his death, right? So she struggled with that, but she won that victory or that battle as well. In her cloister, Therese refined her little way of confidence and love, and going through the horrible death of tuberculosis, and gaining empathy with people who were atheists who she could not understand. How could you not believe in God? Well, God let her experience the trial of not feeling His presence, so she would empathize with atheists. And, that's something we have to, sometimes we forget how gifted we are to have our Catholic faith, and not just the doctrine of the faith, but faith in God. That personal assent to God's truthfulness, His divine authority and truthfulness. And we forget that faith isn't easy for everyone, and that for us it's a gift. And to work at actually being empathetic to people who don't have faith, and maybe are atheists. I have a brother-in-law who's an atheist. He's a good guy in kind of all sorts of respects. A great father, provider, plays with his kids. Better than maybe a lot of Christian fathers, for that matter, or believing fathers. It's a mystery, really. But I think we have to empathize. It's like, I can kind of understand how somebody lacks faith or struggles with it. Or it is purely empirical. They always need, concrete evidence for ascertaining realities, and just can't transcend to having faith in invisible realities. I can kind of understand, maybe not totally, but God let her experience that final dark night where she tasted the atheist's belief, as it were, what it was like. And we know that soon thereafter, she was in paradise. There's actually evidence of that. She died with a smile, I believe, kind of an ecstatic smile on her face. Her parents are canonized. They're canonized married lay people, which is very encouraging in these times. When I was just at a vicariate meeting, we held it at St. Moses the Black, but we had priests from Hamtramck and Detroit, the Cathedral, Father JJ, and we were talking about marriage preparation and hearing confessions at wedding rehearsals, and how 50% or less of marriages succeed. Oops, we lost that one. So on the Brennan's anniversary, just talking about how we need to support people in marriage and in their vocations, but it is not easy. And I think part of what we need to do is beg God for the grace to be faithful to our vocation every day, whatever your vocation is, as a single person even. Because in different ways, Satan is studying how to undermine us. And sometimes it's just plain old discouragement. It's nothing sensational, but it's plain old discouragement. And St. Therese, who abandoning herself to Jesus, this trusting, childlike abandonment is something we need. I find when I help people in spiritual direction, when I don't ask Jesus for help, I remember one time I did it, just probably forgot. And I relied purely on my human advice. I felt flat. Like I didn't feel there was divine counsel operative in my words. But whenever I asked Jesus, whether I'm meeting with the Chaldean sisters, or a lay person, or one or two priests, just whoever it is, I can feel the Lord talking through me. Not in any kind of sensible way per se, but that the wisdom is more than me. And somehow the Lord puts in my heart head the right words for that person at the right time. Sometimes I'm not even aware of it. Because I'm leaning on Jesus. And that's what the little flower did. She didn't just rely on pure willpower, but whether it was, entering Carmel at an early age and asking the Pope for permission, whether it was interceding for Pranzini, whether it was dealing with anointing sisters in the convent, whether it was teaching the novices that they said her wisdom was truly divine, that she was beyond her years, more mature than her years. Do you lean on Jesus, who is divine wisdom? It can be for even if you're angry with your husband, asking Jesus, Lord, let me not show it, and let me say what he needs to hear in the right way, the right tone of voice with the right facial expressions, and not let him see what I really feel. That kind of thing. All of that is counting towards love. And so St. Therese, in some ways, shows us that perfection is attainable for all of us. There is no excuse for us not to become saints. Except, if we rely on ourselves, if we rely on Jesus, and ask our patroness today, who will send you a rose. I think we have daisies and carnations here. I was looking for a rose. I guess we're going to have to look harder. But she will send you a rose today if you ask her. Not to test her, but something you genuinely need for your spiritual life or that of others. On the feast of a saint, you get special graces. Ask her for the help you need, that your vocation in the heart of the church is love, which is what, I'm not going to read you that long passage, but that's what she discovered reading 1 Corinthians 12 and then 13. Also, she supported a young French priest, I think he was a priest, not a seminary at the time, in the missions. She's the patroness of the missions, and she didn't even leave the convent, which I think is extraordinary. I remember when I was living in the West Bank for a year, in 2003 to 4, I became friends with a Palestinian Catholic family. And ironically, the girl I was more friends with, her name was Therese, but it was her older sister who was reading the story of a soul in Arabic. She was discerning religious life. So it's gone everywhere. This has been translated, in many languages. Her worldwide popularity is phenomenal for someone who didn't leave the convent. It was God's plan. It was God's plan. And she is the patroness of the missions. You might think, I know mission territories everywhere, and it's here in Detroit, it's in our doorstep. But do you actively intercede for missions? One of the greatest occupational hazards or difficulties of mission work is loneliness and discouragement, especially if you're kind of a Lone Ranger missionary. You can imagine. When I was, again, in the Holy Land, I didn't know Arabic very much. So I was always kind of an outsider. Luckily, the priest spoke Italian, so that helped a lot. But, with other folks, that didn't happen. It was just English. And so maybe you can adopt a missionary, or think how you can actively intercede for the missions in a more intentional way. I know America's mission territory. In 1908, we ceased to be officially a mission country. But I'd like to have the Pope officially put us back on. We're heading towards atheism and lack of religion very quickly. But can you, in the spirit of St. Therese, perhaps find a way to be more actively interceding for the missions? Because we still have to spread the gospel. And our missionaries do get discouraged, lonely. The results are meager at times. And sometimes, other groups like the Protestant groups, are well-funded and we're not, or whatever. There's just all sorts of stuff going on. So can you be a missionary even from your couch, even from your home, and pray, and maybe support a missionary or whatever? It's up to you to discern what you can do. But I think that would please St. Therese, because now she's spending her, her heaven on earth, sending flowers, and spreading the church. The church has grown because of St. Therese, incredibly. Many souls have come to Christ, to the Catholic Church, and to their vocations by this little 24-year-old nun that was unknown to the world, and her holiness was unknown even to her sisters. So let's ask the little flower to intercede for us today, whatever it is, to try to have the little victories of sanctity in daily living. That's where it all begins, in the home. Charity begins in the home. And to also intercede for missionaries who are often lonely, discouraged, and feel abandoned. They really do. So St. Therese might be a little flower, but she is a giant of love. At the end of Mass, I will offer a blessing with her relic here if you like it. So I just want you to hang around if you have time to do that. St. Therese of the Child Jesus, pray for us.